Hello and welcome back to Roots and Gaps. My name is B. On my last episode, we introduced 3 Hmong and the Hmong American accent. Today, we are going to explore how language evolves and how it affected the Hmong language. Our first video is going to be on TED Ed with a speaker named Alex Jindler. Excuse me if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. Let's see what she shares with us about how language evolves.
In the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, all of humanity once spoke a single language until they suddenly split into many groups unable to understand each other. We don't really know if such an original language ever existed, but we do know that the thousands of languages existing today can be traced back to a much smaller number. So how did we end up with so many? In the early days of human migration, the world was much less populated. Groups of people that shared a single language and culture often split into smaller tribes, going separate ways in search of fresh game and fertile land. As they migrated and settled in new places, they became isolated from one another and developed in different ways. Centuries of living in different conditions, eating different food, and encountering different neighbors turned similar dialects with varied pronunciation and vocabulary into radically different languages, continuing to divide as populations grew and spread out further. Like genealogists, modern linguists try to map this process by tracing multiple languages back as far as they can to their common ancestor, or proto-language. A group of all languages related in this way is called a language family, which can contain many branches and subfamilies. So how do we determine whether languages are related in the first place? Similar-sounding words don't tell us much. They could be false cognates or just directly borrowed terms rather than derived from a common root. Grammar and syntax are a more reliable guide, as well as basic vocabulary such as pronouns, numbers, or kinship terms that's less likely to be borrowed. By systematically comparing these features and looking for regular patterns of sound changes and correspondences between languages, linguists can determine relationships, trace specific steps in their evolution, and even reconstruct earlier languages with no written records.
So, when she started talking about how language evolves, she introduces it as a small tribe who speaks the same language. They branch out and they adapt to different things, so they start speaking different languages. This makes sense why we have the Western Hmong dialect, the Central Hmong dialect, and the Eastern Hmong dialect. And then she goes on further talking about how we can determine if languages are related. And she talks about grammar and syntax. Now, we can't do that to the Western Hmong dialect because, like we already know, it's essentially the same language, just different accents. As for Central Hmong dialect and the Eastern Hmong dialect, I can't speak them, so I can't make that comparison. However, we can explore this on another language, Mandarin. Why not, right? We did say that we migrated from China before going into Southeast Asia and then into America, right? So there has to be some kind of relationship between our language and the Mandarin language. And there is. Let's take, for example, at the word le. In our language, le is pronounced le. It essentially is a word that is used to describe when something has already been done. For example, let's say the phrase, have you eaten? Mandarin, it would be, 你吃饭了吗? White Hmong dialect will say, 干那么了咯? Le comes after the word 吃饭. And then if we look at the White Hmong dialect, le comes after the word 那么. 吃饭 means to eat, and 那么 also means to eat. This sentence word for word is essentially the same. 你 and 个 is you. 吃饭 那么 we already know, to eat. Le and le, same thing. And ma and la are both the same yes and no question particles. Now, some of you might say, well, it doesn't sound the same. Well, remember, we're talking about grammar structure and syntax. I chose to use the word le because the word le and the word la are words that are less likely to be borrowed. But if we do want to look at words that does sound the same or similar, let's take a look at the phrase, the cards are coming. Like, for example, like someone's bringing poker cards. In Mandarin, they would say, 牌来了. In White Hmong, we would say, 牌来了. Now you hear something similar, right? 牌 is 牌 for cards. 来 is law for coming. And 了 and lo, we already know what it is. Now, Alex mentioned kinship terms. In a way, I half agree to this, only because when I mentioned the word mom, Hmong says nia. We do see that kinship terms do change. Like Hmong in America are starting to say mom and dad for mom and dad. Even if we were to describe, cousin, we don't say the word for cousin. We just say cousin. Even brother and sisters, we don't really use it. This is happening in Laos too. Hmong in Laos, they're starting to say May for mom. For father, they're starting to say Po. Sister, I think this means little sister. I'm not sure. Go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong. Hmong from Laos. Little sister, they're starting to say Nong Sao. And then brother, they're starting to say I. So in a way, I half agree and half don't agree, just because it is possible for kinship terms to change. Now, sure, someone can argue saying that this is just the progression of language. And I would say, you're right, it is the progression of language. However, I would also argue saying that it affects the Hmong culture a lot more because we are an ethnic minority. Let me explain. One, our language isn't a dominant language. And two, say we standardize the Hmong language in America. We cannot guarantee that Hmong in Asia is going to use this standard to speak Hmong. We can't. And then if we do it, how do we standardize what's Hmong Da and what's Hmong Jaw, right? Or what's Hmong Lang? Hmong's language in Asia is going to continue to evolve based off of the country that they are in. And the further gap we become from each other, the more it's going to be indistinguishable.
The other problem is that the farther we move back in time towards the top of the tree, the less evidence we have about the languages there.
So because language changes over time and our language isn't a dominant language, language evolution and the progression of language affects us a lot more. So going back to Western Hmong dialect, Central Hmong dialect, and Eastern Hmong dialect, if we go based off of timeline, then the Western Hmong dialect and the Eastern Hmong dialect, we are roughly 4,000 years apart. Let's take a closer look by watching this video of a Hmong American with a Hmong Guizhou talking about our languages.
And then I say Hmong. And then I would say, what is drink in Hmong? And we discover that drink is the same. How, and we say how, so it's similar, right? And then I would ask her, what is water? And I say day, and Yufan say oh. And so we do this back and forth for a whole hour and a half to Sheboygan, and we discover there's only 6 words of those that we talk about that has similar tone, and the rest are totally different in meaning. So that shows how far our language has separated and the dialect has shifted. And we adopt new things. We always say, maybe we are the one that's original and we keep our dialect, and the one in China are the one that shifted the dialect and changed it because they change. And then they say the same thing to us, right? So we don't know which one is the real one, but the dialects has, changes. And I know that when we move to different country, we live different places, we start to adopt different languages. So for example, my father, who is very old, and he started adopting English, and I just like, oh my God. So when we talk, he say, "Có bộ more idea." He throw in the word idea in there. And I go, look, Dad, why are you speaking English? Mix, So we started saying a few words, instead of saying telephone, we, instead of saying "saltong" in Hmong, we say telephone, so we start to adapt words here and there in English. So then we speak Hmong English in the United States. We call Hmonglish, right? Because then Yifeng come and she speak her Hmong Chinese and we would understand it. The Hmong Thai from Thailand come and they speak Hmong Thai and we don't necessarily understand either because they throw some Thai in there, and we throw some English in there. And then the Hmong Lao come from Laos and they speak some Lao in there, and then we don't understand it, so it's very dynamic and very interesting how the language has been adopted based on the environment that we lived in, so when we live in Laos, we start throwing some word in there too, so like our little kids here in the United States may say the word bai, which means go, but that's not Hmong. Yeah, Hmong. Mm-hmm. In Hmong it says mo, right? We totally skip that mo and then we say bai. And then our kids learn bai, and then they think bai is Hmong, but it's not, So there's layers of different languages.
So this last part that she was talking about, the word bai, that the fact that it's not a Hmong word, this is an example of language evolving and how we're adapting to other culture because of different environments. And this is true. Some don't even know that bai is not a Hmong word. Some do know that bai is not a Hmong word. Some do still use the word mu and Hmong. Hmong is mu, Hmong is Hmong. The reason why I know this is because when I was going to church, we like to sing in Hmong, and then we also have the Hmong version. One of my favorite songs to sing goes like this. And then we would sing the Hmong version. And there are other words that it's starting to change too, and some don't know that it's not a Hmong word. But it's okay. I'm not saying it's bad. Language evolution is going to happen as we see. But another word I do want to talk about is the word 1000. Hmong is 1000. Hmong is 1000. The progression of Hmong and Hmong, where Laotian words was borrowed, was saying 一爬, and some would say both, and some would only say one and think there's only one. And although I talk about Hmong, Hmong Ling in America, I actually would categorize Hmong speakers into like 4 different categories. The first category, I would say the Hmong people who speaks the language that didn't change. The second categories would be the ones that are using the words that are changed. Third group, I feel, is the majority, are the hybrid groups. This is disregarding the fact that they're either Hmong or Hmong. They could be speaking either accent, but they'll be mixing words. For example, I'll go on and off on the word mu and bai, right? I would do them unconsciously. And then I would also add some Hmong words too. The word but, B-U-T. Hmong is diashi, but I would sometimes say dashi, which is Hmong. To explore this even further, let's take a look at how 3 Hmong counts from 1 to 10. Pretty cool, right? As you can see, it's sort of recognizable, right? This is proof of language evolution. Now, this isn't to say that we, Hmong in general, should segregate each other. No, this is to say that we are one family, one ethnicity, and due to the fact that we are in different areas, our language is starting to shift and change. We are lucky that Hmong in Guizhou and Hmong in Henan are in China. Otherwise, we wouldn't know that they're Hmong because we have Hmong from Yunnan who speaks the same language as we do. If they didn't tell us they're Hmong, we wouldn't know. Or if they were to say for example, if they were to say they're Hmong, we wouldn't know, right? For Hmong Americans today, we actually somewhat have recordings of our language roughly 30 years ago. Some of you might be wondering, what is this guy talking about? Well, let me tell you. We have records somewhat from old Chinese Hmong dub movies.
进入的时候。好时间点。你准备什么吃的呢？拉么了吗？
木。
師傅，呢部政府鼓勵呢度師傅。傅，但是你就成人的了。
有個。
你就說對了。
打傻天子娘。
叫不殺手，傻天子娘娘的，結果
娘下打了啊。
木。
美爸，
师傅。
12的总队。
走。
So words like 跑系 we don't really use anymore, right? In America, we tend to use the word English word now. We just say danger or dangerous. Another word that we don't really use is the word 造. We don't use that word anymore. The one word that I think that's also starting to fade away from our language is the word protect. We say 保护. So if language evolution is a thing and it affects our culture a lot more than others, how do we keep our culture alive? And how do we know these are our people? First, we have to understand what language evolution is and how it's evolving. Second, I would say that we need to be neutral, because if we are separated, right, there are possibilities of culture changes. And then if lastly we're able to do both of these, we just need to communicate. Now this is just my opinion on if we want to keep our culture alive and to determine who our people are. Others might see it differently, but this is just my opinion. Next time we're going to explore how language evolves based off of the white Hmong accent. This is all I have for today. If you enjoy and like what you hear, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.